Hello and welcome to the Arbitration Conversation. So in this Arbitration Conversation, we are talking to a really exciting new rock star in this area of online dispute resolution. And his name is Professor Oladeji Tiamiyu, and he's a clinical fellow at the Harvard Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program. However, before joining the Harvard team, he actually was a fellow in online dispute resolution with RSI in Chicago, where they are doing some really exciting work in the area of family ODR. There's a lot more I could say. Oladeji has worked with Truth and Reconciliation and he was part of the Commission and Constitutional Review Commission in the Gambia. So first of all, thank you so much for taking time. I could say a lot more. You have an amazing background, just a lot of so many things I could ask you about. So thank you.
Well, Amy, I have to thank you. I'm so humbled to be on your show. I've read so much of your scholarly work. I've also been following this show really closely. You've had some great conversations here. So to me, I just feel really honored to be part of the conversation here.
We're honored to have you, and especially on this very sort of emerging and new topic, this area of blockchain arbitration. So first of all, could you just tell us a little bit about what you think of when you hear those words, blockchain arbitration? What is that?
Yeah, so there are just so many different definitions trying to simplify something that I think is simple, but can be over complicated. So to me, the first part is the blockchain sphere. And to me, I just think of blockchains as a simple way to store data on a system. There's another perspective that can be just a ledger that stores information that's shared with that ledger, debits and credits basically, and who owes what to whom. But to me, I think the crux and the most essential piece of a blockchain is a system that can store data. And then when it comes to the arbitration and ODR world, like where it merges with blockchains is an opportunity to resolve disputes that is occurring on the blockchain. There are so many different blockchains out there right now. They're all doing different types of things. And so it's really important to have a system to manage and resolve disputes that are occurring on that blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that strikes me, we hear so much about cryptocurrencies, right? And so when people hear blockchain, they right away jump to cryptocurrencies. But in fact, the real issue, I would argue, is smart contracts when we think about blockchain disputes and arbitration and how that might help with these sort of smart contract disputes. Maybe you want to speak to kind of how blockchain brings us into smart contracts.
Yeah, so the world of smart contracts is really exciting. And I actually think Amy, you've written extensively about this world too. So I'm very curious about your perspective. But to me, I think from like a first principles perspective, I'd say that in the ODR world, what we've seen through history is that new forms of technology creates new types of disputes, right? This is something that Ethan Katch has written plenty about. And what we're seeing with smart contracts is a new type of technology. And it's a new type of technology that I think creates clarity in some respects, but inevitably also leads to certain unexpected circumstances, right? So with smart contracts, these are just self-executing lines of code. Some people describe it as like a vending machine. You put in certain amount of information and it outputs a different amount of information. So on these smart contracts, you can have bugs in the system, right? Any programmer will tell you that when they are going through their code, they have to review it multiple times because bugs in lines of code are inevitable. They're really common. But when you are transacting using lines of code, the problems, I think, can be accentuated because bugs lead to uncertainty. Uncertainty leads to confusion. Confusion leads to disputes, right? So It's really important, and I think that the smart contract world is really drawing a lot of attention to how they can manage disputes, governance protocols that they can put in place. And so these blockchain-based ODR systems are very much at the center of how to manage confusion, uncertainty that can come out of bugs from lines of code that are written.
Yeah, no, that resonates. I mean, of course, the theory is, well, we can put it into the blockchain, we can have a smart contract in order to promote efficiency, and it's going to be self-executing, and we're going to prevent any types of disputes. But in fact, disputes will, of course, develop, right? And there's got to be some way to resolve those disputes. I guess I'm wondering also now when we sort of jump into this question of quote unquote arbitration within this blockchain, there's a lot of different iterations. We have tokenized arbitration. We also have good old fashioned arbitration. I wondered if you had any thoughts about what type of arbitration makes the most sense for smart contract disputes.
Yeah. So to me, once again, going back through history and first principles, I think it's really important to keep in mind fitting the form to the fuss, right? Frank Sander, I think, got that really succinctly. And to me, I think it's good to have optionality, right? If there's just one size fits all approach, there's so much nuance, both in blockchains, like we could even talk about general purpose blockchains, limited purpose blockchains. There's so many differences within the blockchain systems. And so it's important to have different types of blockchain arbitration systems to give optionality to disputants, right? To have more options for them to fit their particular types of disputes to the context of a dispute resolution platform. And so to me, there are a proliferation of different types of ways to manage these blockchain-based disputes. There are companies that are tokenizing, using crypto economics, basically to incentivize arbitrators to reach the right outcome, which I think is such a unique approach because a fundamental tenet, and I talk about this in my upcoming paper, a fundamental tenet of dispute resolution systems is impartiality and a lack of a conflict of interest. And tokenizing certain disputes leads to nodes in the system, arbitrators, having financial incentives to reach a fair or right outcome. And it leads to parties that are not in the majority to be essentially financially punished by having to pay a fee or not getting the money that they put into the system back. So the tokenization, I think, is such a novel approach, and I'm really excited by it because it's opening up incentives for arbitrators who might overlook certain disputes in the past to want to be involved in resolving different types of disputes. And that's just one aspect of the blockchain ODR world. And then you have non-tokenized systems. I think Jur.io has been taking an approach that is still on a blockchain, but doesn't emphasize the crypto economics that someone like Kleros has been emphasizing. So there are definitely nuances, there are distinctions, and I'm excited about the optionality that's being presented to disputants in the blockchain world.
Yeah, no, I love that. No, I mean, that resonates absolutely. This idea, going back to something you mentioned earlier and Frank Sander and kind of, I'm thinking about the multi-door courthouse, right? We can have a multi-door blockchain courthouse with these different options, depending on what your needs are and what type of dispute you have. Yeah, in fact, I had the opportunity to be on a panel with the head of Jur.io as well as Kleros. Oh. And they acknowledge that they have their markets are different. It's different types of disputes, different types of parties. Some parties may be more comfortable with tokenized dispute resolution, whereas others might be skeptical, right? And they might want sort of a panel of experts, but it really kind of fitting the forum to the fuss, as you said. And that brings me to, I'd like to give a shout out to your paper that's forthcoming. So when will we be able to read this paper in print?
Yeah. So the paper is titled "The Impending Battle for the Soul of Online Dispute Resolution," and it kind of lays out different types of online dispute resolution that we're seeing. And it's not just a proliferation in blockchain ODR, but it's a proliferation in so many different types of dispute resolutions that incorporate technology into the system design. And then in addition to kind of exploring those multiple branches of online dispute resolution, I then explore some of the ethical considerations, going back to ADR and how ADR has formulated ethics in the system design, and maybe distinctions, changes, if you will, that could be taken now that new technologies are being afoot. So when it will be finalized, I'm thinking by the end of July. I've done a lot of work into it. There's a lot more, especially on the aspect of the ethics and the access to justice piece. I was actually listening to a conversation you had, I believe, just a few days ago with AALS, and the access to justice piece for online dispute resolution is so important, right? We've seen it historically with e-commerce and how new governance practices were put in place to manage these disputes. But I think increasingly, right, during the pandemic, we've just seen a humongous growth of e-commerce and new types of ways to engage with the digital world during this time period. And I like to think that actually these are going to be fundamental changes in how individuals engage with the digital world. I don't think, I'm skeptical that the amount of engagement users had with the digital world prior to the pandemic will be the same after the pandemic. I think that stakeholder preferences have changed significantly and permanently. So because of that, this paper, and I'm sure hopefully there will be other practitioners, I'm sure academics like yourself are going to be exploring some of these changes. And this paper really is just raising certain questions, answering potential questions for the post-pandemic world.
No, I mean, and the problem, we have so much more to sort of work out in terms of ethical standards. I mean, should they be standards, best practices, guidance? Because you're right. I think the world has changed, right? In a way, Colin Rule actually says this all the time, that the pandemic has done more for ODR than anything any other scholars or practitioners have done in the last 20 years. So absolutely, it's moved us forward, but that has both the upside and downside. In other words, it also gives us that responsibility to develop ethical practices and figure out the best way to enforce those practices. Much more to follow. This has been a great conversation. Oladeji, thank you so much for taking time. I look forward to our continuing this conversation on ethics and ODR, and looking forward to the future of dispute resolution. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. I'm glad to have been involved and part of the conversation, and I'm really excited for future conversations we'll be having and future amazing scholarly papers you'll be producing, I'm sure.
You as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.